I sat in the mahogany-paneled office, my hands folded in my lap, as the lawyer shuffled through papers. Dad had been gone for 3 weeks, and I still couldn't believe this was happening. The will reading felt surreal. To my daughter Brittany, Mr. Henderson read aloud, I leave my entire estate, including the family home, all properties, business assets, and financial accounts. My stomach dropped. I glanced at Brittany, who was practically glowing beside me. She'd worn her most expensive dress today, as if she'd known this was coming. What about Anna? I heard myself ask quietly. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. There's a small personal items clause, but that's essentially it. Brittany turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, this is awkward, she said, not sounding awkward at all. She gathered her purse and stood up, smoothing her skirt. I guess Dad finally saw who really deserved everything. The words hit me like a slap. 28 years of being the quiet daughter, the one who helped Dad with his books, who visited every Sunday, who held his hand in the hospital. None of it mattered now. You were always just background noise, Anna, Brittany added, walking toward the door. I drove to the family home the next morning, needing to say goodbye to the place where I'd grown up. The white colonial with blue shutters had been our sanctuary after Mom died when I was 12. Dad and I had spent countless evenings on that front porch, him teaching me about constellations while Brittany was out with friends. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw the moving truck. Brittany stood on the porch, pointing at various items while 2 men loaded boxes. My heart sank when I spotted my childhood belongings scattered across the driveway like garage sale rejects. My books, photo albums, even Mom's jewelry box that Dad had promised would be mine someday. Oh, Anna, Brittany called out, not even looking embarrassed. I found some of your old junk. You'll want to grab it before the trash pickup. I knelt beside Mom's jewelry box, running my fingers over the familiar velvet lining. Inside were my grandmother's pearls, Mom's wedding ring, and a small photo of the 4 of us from when I was 7. Brittany, these were what? She interrupted. Look, I'm being generous here. Take your stuff and go. I stood up slowly, clutching the jewelry box. This isn't your house anymore. Get off my property. The funeral had been only a month ago, but it felt like yesterday. I remembered standing in the back of the church watching Brittany work the crowd like she was hosting a cocktail party. She'd worn designer black, her hair perfectly styled, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Thank you so much for coming, she'd said to Dad's business partner, gripping his hands dramatically. Daddy would be so touched. I'd stayed quiet in the corner, still processing the reality that Dad was gone. People kept approaching me with kind words, but I felt hollow inside. While Brittany networked, I'd simply tried to breathe. After the service, I'd overheard her talking to our Aunt Margaret by the coffee table. I know this sounds terrible, Brittany had said, lowering her voice, but I'm actually relieved. Dad finally saw who really cared about the family legacy. Aunt Margaret had looked uncomfortable. Brittany, your sister loved him too. Did she? Because I'm the one who convinced him to update his will. I'm the one who showed him how to secure the family's future. Brittany had straightened her shoulders. I earned it. Dad finally saw who deserved it. Those words had echoed in my mind for weeks. Had I really been that invisible to him? Everyone expected me to fight the will. Even Mr. Henderson had pulled me aside after the reading, his expression concerned. Anna, you have grounds to contest this, he'd said quietly. Your father's decision seems unusual, given your relationship with him. But I'd just shaken my head. No, thank you. My friends thought I was crazy. You can't just let her take everything, my coworker Janet had insisted over coffee. That house has been in your family for generations. It's what Dad wanted, I'd replied, stirring sugar into my cup. But what about all those times you helped him? The bookkeeping, the Sunday dinners? You were the one who took care of him. I'd thought about that conversation for days. Maybe I should have fought. Maybe I should have demanded answers. But something inside me felt tired, worn down by years of being the quiet one, the accommodating one. When Mr. Henderson called to check on my decision, I'd been firm. Let her have it. All of it. There had been a long pause. Are you sure, Anna? This seems very unfair. I'm sure. Within a week, Brittany had transformed the family home. She'd hired an interior designer and posted photos on social media showing the updates. Dad's favorite recliner was gone, replaced by a sleek, modern chair. The family photos had been removed from the mantel, replaced with abstract art. I'd driven by one evening and seen her through the window, hosting what looked like a dinner party. She was laughing loudly, gesturing with a wine glass, playing the role of the successful heiress. The next morning, I'd run into Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor, at the grocery store. She'd always been fond of our family. "Anna, dear, I'm so sorry about your father," she'd said, squeezing my arm. "And I have to say, the changes at the house are quite dramatic." I'd nodded politely. "Brittany has her own style." Mrs. Patterson had leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, I don't think your sister knows what she's walked into. Your father kept things very private, but I remember seeing official-looking mail piling up in his later years." "What kind of mail?" "Oh, I shouldn't say. But your sister doesn't know what she's walked into," she'd repeated, shaking her head as she pushed her cart away. "I found out about the first letter from Janet, who'd heard it from her friend who worked at the post office. Brittany had received a formal letter from Fletcher & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. She just tossed it aside, Janet had told me during our lunch break. Didn't even open it. I'd felt a strange flutter in my stomach. Maybe it was just junk mail. From a law firm? Unlikely. That evening, I tried to push the conversation out of my mind. I was living in a small studio apartment now, working extra shifts at the bookstore to make ends meet. Whatever was happening with Brittany's inheritance wasn't my concern anymore. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Patterson's words. What had she meant about Dad keeping things private? 2 days later, Janet had more news. "Your sister got another letter." This one was marked urgent in red letters. I'd set down my coffee cup carefully. Did she open it? Nope. Threw it in the trash. That night, I'd lain awake wondering what those letters contained. Part of me wanted to call Brittany to warn her that official mail shouldn't be ignored. But I remembered her words at the will reading. The way she'd looked at me like I was nothing. Let her handle it herself. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was shelving books when my phone rang, Brittany's name flashing on the screen. I almost didn't answer. "Anna?" Her voice was higher than usual, strained. "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "Did Dad ever mention anything about problems with the Riverside property?" I paused, a book halfway to the shelf. "The cabin? No. Why?" "Because I just found out there's $47,000 in unpaid taxes and penalties attached to it." $47,000, Anna. My hands went cold. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. I've been trying to sell it, and the buyer walked away when they found the liens. The whole deal fell through." I could hear the panic in her voice now. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I can't afford to pay that much, and I can't sell it with the liens attached. It's like a trap." After she hung up, I sat in the empty bookstore, staring at my phone. Dad had never mentioned any problems with the cabin. But then again, he'd never mentioned changing his will either. My new routine was simple. Work at the bookstore, go home to my small apartment, repeat. The customers were kind, often asking about my father and expressing sympathy for my loss. I kept my head high, maintained my dignity. "You're handling this whole situation with such grace," Mrs. Chen, a regular customer, had told me while buying a mystery novel. "I don't know how you do it." I just smiled. "Thank you." What she didn't know was that I cried myself to sleep most nights, not from sadness, but from a deep, aching confusion. How had I misjudged my relationship with Dad so completely? The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was addressed to me from the county clerk's office. Inside was a notice about the burial plot deed. Apparently, it hadn't been properly transferred to Brittany's name. The original deed holder, Anna Mitchell, must sign the transfer documents, the letter stated. I'd read it 3 times before understanding. Dad had put the burial plot in my name years ago, probably after Mom died. Brittany had inherited everything else, but she'd failed to transfer this one small detail. It was the first time in weeks that I'd felt something other than sadness. Not satisfaction exactly, but a tiny spark of something. I was restocking the history section when I saw Brittany through the store window. She was pacing outside, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically. She looked different. less polished, more frazzled. She pushed through the door, the bell chiming harshly. "Anna, we need to talk." I continued shelving books. "About what?" "About Dad's business. There are complications." I turned to face her. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun and she wasn't wearing makeup. "What kind of complications?" "Missing inventory, unpaid bills. 3 former employees are threatening to sue for back wages." She ran her hands through her hair. "I thought the business was profitable." "It was when Dad was running it." "Well, it's not anymore. There's a vendor demanding $20,000 for supplies that were apparently never paid for, and the insurance lapsed 6 months ago." I picked up another book, examining its cover. "Sounds like you have a lot to figure out." "Anna, please. I know things have been strained between us, but I need help." My phone was in my pocket, vibrating with what was probably another of her desperate calls. I let it ring. "I'm sorry, Brittany. I have work to do." The second property went underwater faster than anyone expected. According to Janet, who heard it from her cousin who worked at the bank, the downtown rental property that Brittany had inherited was facing foreclosure. She missed 3 mortgage payments, Janet had whispered during our coffee break. And the insurance lapsed, so when the tenant's pipe burst last month, there was no coverage. I'd stirred my coffee slowly, processing this information. How much damage? $15,000 in water damage, plus the lost rental income. The tenant moved out, and now the property's sitting empty with a mortgage she can't pay. That evening, I'd walked past the property on my way home from work. It was a small duplex Dad had bought as an investment years ago. The windows were dark, and I could see water stains on the porch ceiling. A notice was taped to the front door. Even from the sidewalk, I could make out the bold letters, "Default Notice." I'd stood there for a long moment, remembering how proud Dad had been when he'd bought this place. "It's for your future," he'd told me and Brittany, "something to build on." Now it was crumbling, and Brittany was nowhere to be found. The memory hit me while I was organizing receipts in the bookstore's back office. It was from about 5 years ago, one of our regular Sunday dinners. Dad had been quieter than usual, pushing food around his plate. "You need to be more careful with money," he'd told Brittany, who was describing her latest shopping trip. "You can't just spend without thinking about consequences." Brittany had rolled her eyes. "Dad, I'm fine. I have a good job." "Jobs can disappear. Economic situations change. You need to understand what things are really worth." I'd been clearing dishes, as always, listening to their conversation while staying invisible. Brittany had gotten defensive, her voice rising. "I'm not stupid, Dad. I know how to handle money." "Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you think money grows on trees." The argument had escalated until Brittany stormed out, leaving Dad and me alone in the kitchen. I'd been washing dishes when he'd spoken softly behind me. "You always knew what things were really worth, Anna. You understood that family meant more than stuff." I'd turned around, surprised by the sadness in his voice. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm proud of you," he'd said simply. "Don't forget that." Now, sitting in the bookstore, I wondered if that conversation had meant more than I'd realized at the time. The town was small enough that news traveled fast. Within a month, everyone knew that Brittany wasn't paying her contractors. The man who'd installed her new kitchen countertops had been talking at the hardware store about his unpaid invoice. "She keeps saying the check is in the mail," he'd complained to anyone who would listen. "But it's been 6 weeks." I'd overheard similar conversations at the grocery store, the gas station, even at the post office. Brittany had made a lot of promises when she'd inherited the estate, but apparently she wasn't keeping them. My former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had stopped by the bookstore one afternoon. "Anna, dear, I hate to say this, but your sister's making quite a reputation for herself." "What do you mean?" "She's not paying her bills. The landscaping company, the cleaning service, even the grocery store is asking for cash up front now." Mrs. Patterson had shaken her head sadly. "Your father would be heartbroken." After she left, I'd sat at the counter, staring out the window. A few months ago, Brittany had been the golden child, the one who'd inherited everything. Now she was becoming the person people whispered about. "She's not who she thinks she is," Mrs. Patterson had said before leaving. The words stayed with me long after closing time. I saw Brittany at the bank one Tuesday morning, arguing with the loan officer. She was wearing a new dress and expensive shoes, but her voice was getting louder by the minute. "I just need a bridge loan," she was saying. "The estate has plenty of assets." The loan officer, a patient man named Mr. Rodriguez, was shaking his head. "Miss Mitchell, the assets have too many encumbrances. We can't approve this." Brittany had stormed out, nearly knocking over a potted plant by the door. She didn't see me sitting in the waiting area, but I saw her, the desperation in her movements, the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. That afternoon, Janet had news. "Your sister leased a new BMW yesterday, top of the line, fully loaded." I'd looked up from my inventory list. "How do you know?" "My cousin works at the dealership. He said she was bragging about how she was upgrading her image now that she had the inheritance." 3 days later, the same cousin had called Janet with an update. They called and canceled the lease. Her credit application was declined. Declined? But she has the inheritance. Apparently, having assets and being able to pay monthly bills are two different things. I'd thought about that conversation all evening. Brittany had the house, the properties, the business, everything Dad had built over decades. But she couldn't get a car loan. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Thursday. I only knew about it because the postal worker, Mrs. Rodriguez, had mentioned it while buying a cookbook. "I hate delivering those notices," she'd said, shaking her head. "Especially to families going through hard times." "What kind of notice?" "Foreclosure. The vacation property up by the lake. Such a shame. I remember your father taking you girls there when you were little." My chest tightened. The cabin had been our special place, where Dad taught me to fish and where we'd scattered Mom's ashes. The thought of losing it to foreclosure felt like losing another piece of him. "How long does she have?" 60 days, I think, unless she can catch up on the payments." That evening, I'd driven up to the lake. The cabin sat empty, its windows dark. Weeds had grown up around the foundation, and the dock was missing several boards. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I'd sat in my car for an hour, remembering better times. Dad teaching me to bait a hook. Brittany complaining about mosquitoes. Mom laughing at Dad's terrible fishing jokes. Now it was just another asset that Brittany couldn't afford to keep. My second job at the diner started on a Monday. I needed the extra money to cover rent, and the work kept me busy enough to avoid thinking about everything I'd lost. Walking home from my evening shift, I'd pass the family house. Brittany had installed a tall iron gate and security cameras, making it look more like a fortress than a home. Through the windows, I could see her sitting alone at the dining room table, her head in her hands. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The expensive clothes and perfect hair couldn't hide the fact that she was crying. For a moment, I'd felt a pang of sympathy. We'd been sisters once, before the inheritance and the bitter words. We'd shared a room as children, whispered secrets in the dark. But then I'd remembered her words at the will reading, the way she dismissed me as background noise. I'd kept walking. The next morning, Janet had asked if I was going to reach out to Brittany. "She looks terrible," Janet had said, "like she hasn't slept in days." "That's not my problem anymore." "But she's your sister." I'd arranged books on a display shelf, keeping my hands busy. She made her choice. The letter addressed to me was waiting when I got home from work. It was from First National Bank, regarding an account I'd never heard of. "Dear Miss Mitchell," it read, "we're writing to inform you that you are listed as a co-signer on account number 4578932, which is currently in default. As the surviving account holder, you are responsible for the outstanding balance of $12,847. My hands shook as I read it again. Dad had put me on this account years ago, probably for emergency purposes, but Brittany had failed to transfer it when she'd inherited everything else. I'd stared at the letter for a long time, anger building in my chest. Even in death, Dad's financial problems were finding their way to me. Even when I'd gotten nothing, I was still responsible for his debts. The next morning, I'd gone to the bank and paid the balance with money from my savings account. The teller had looked surprised. "You don't have to pay this, you know," she'd said. "You could dispute it." "I know. The account wasn't even in your name. It was just a backup signature." I'd signed the payment slip anyway. "It's done." Walking home, I'd felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of clarity. I was cleaning up messes I hadn't made, paying for choices I hadn't been part of. The garage sale was Brittany's idea of a quick fix. I'd heard about it from Mrs. Patterson, who'd seen the signs posted around the neighborhood. "She's selling everything," Mrs. Patterson had said, shaking her head. "Jewelry, furniture, even some of your father's tools." I'd driven by on Saturday morning, curious despite myself. The driveway was full of tables covered with items from our childhood home. Dad's favorite lamp, Mom's china set, even the wooden chess set Dad had taught me to play on. Brittany was standing behind a card table, making change for customers. She looked tired, older somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, more casual than I'd seen her in years. A man was examining Dad's workbench, the one he'd used for weekend projects. "How much for this?" $50, Brittany had said quickly. "I'll take it." I'd watched from my car as strangers bought pieces of our family history. A woman purchased Mom's sewing machine. A teenager bought Dad's fishing rods. Everything was priced to move, sold to anyone with cash. By evening, most of the tables were empty. But the bills were still there, still growing. The knock on my door came at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I'd been reading, trying to relax after a long day at both jobs. When I opened the door, Brittany was standing in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her makeup smeared, and she was wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in at the garage sale 3 days earlier. "You knew about this, didn't you?" she said without preamble. "Knew about what?" "The debts, the taxes, the liens." Her voice was shaking. "You knew Dad was in trouble financially." I stepped aside to let her in. "No, Brittany, I didn't know. Don't lie to me, you had to know. You did his books, you spent all that time with him." She was pacing now, gesturing wildly. "You knew, and you let me walk into this trap." I sat down in my single chair, gesturing for her to take the couch. "I didn't know about any of it. I'm as surprised as you are." "But you understand it now, don't you? You understand why he did this." I looked at her for a long moment. "No, but I understand it now." She stared at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I understand why you're here, why you're scared, why you're finally talking to me like I'm a real person." Brittany's voice was smaller now, more vulnerable. "I don't know what to do, Anna. I can't keep up with the payments. The house is mortgaged, the business is failing, and I owe money to everyone." I felt a flicker of sympathy. "What about getting help? A financial advisor, maybe?" "With what money? I can barely afford groceries." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to go from thinking you're rich to realizing you're broke?" "No," I said honestly, "I don't. I thought Dad left me everything because he loved me more, because I was the successful one, the one who could handle responsibility." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I was so wrong. I wanted to help her, to offer some kind of solution. But her next words stopped me cold. "I'm not taking handouts from someone who gave up," she said, standing abruptly. "I'll figure this out myself." "Brittany, wait. No, I came here thinking you might have answers, but you're just as lost as I am." She headed for the door. I should have known better than to ask for help from someone who couldn't even fight for their own inheritance. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words. Over the next few weeks, I watched Brittany's world continue to crumble. Her old friends had stopped calling, probably tired of her constant requests for loans. The social media posts had stopped too, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Janet had heard through the grapevine that Brittany had applied for a loan using the house as collateral. "They turned her down flat," Janet had reported. "The loan officer told her friend that the house has too many liens against it." "What kind of liens?" "Tax liens, contractor liens, even a lien from the homeowners association for unpaid dues." Janet had shaken her head. "Apparently there's nothing left to borrow against." I'd felt a strange mixture of sadness and inevitability. Brittany had inherited everything, but everything had been more complicated than either of us had realized. That weekend, I'd driven past the house again. The for sale sign in the yard was crooked, and the lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. It looked tired, neglected. Through the window, I could see boxes stacked in the living room. Brittany was preparing to move, but where would she go? And what would happen to all of Dad's accumulated debt? Sunday morning, I drove to the cemetery. It was quiet, peaceful, with morning dew still clinging to the grass. Dad's grave was in the older section, under a large oak tree he'd always admired. I sat on the stone bench nearby, pulling out a small piece of paper I'd been carrying for days. It was a note I'd written but never intended to leave. "Dear Dad," I read aloud to the empty air. "I don't understand why you did what you did. You trusted her with everything, and I trusted you to be fair. But maybe none of us saw the truth about what was really happening." A breeze rustled the leaves above me, and I looked up at the sky. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired. Tired of trying to understand choices I'll never understand. I folded the note and placed it beside his headstone, weighing it down with a small stone. "I'm going to be okay, Dad. I'm going to move forward, with or without answers." Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure, exactly, but a kind of acceptance. I was done trying to solve the puzzle of Dad's choices. I was ready to focus on my own life, my own future. The past was the past. I was leaving it behind. The eviction notice appeared on a Tuesday. I only knew about it because Mrs. Patterson had called me, her voice full of concern. "Anna, dear, there's something you should know. Your sister, well, there's a notice on the front door of the house." I'd felt my stomach drop. "What kind of notice?" "Eviction. The sheriff's department posted it this morning." I'd left work early and driven to the house. The notice was official, typed on legal letterhead. "Notice to quit. You are hereby required to quit and deliver up possession of the premises to the owner hereof within 5 days." The house looked empty from the outside. The curtains were drawn, and several newspapers had piled up on the porch. Brittany's car wasn't in the driveway. I'd sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the home where I'd grown up. The white colonial with blue shutters that had once been our sanctuary was now just another foreclosure statistic. A neighbor walking his dog had recognized me and waved. I'd waved back, trying to look normal, but inside I felt hollow. This was really happening. Brittany was losing everything, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The knock on my door came at 10 o'clock at night. I'd been getting ready for bed when I heard the soft tapping. When I opened the door, Brittany was standing there, but she was barely recognizable. Her hair was stringy, her clothes wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. "I've lost everything," she said simply. I stepped aside to let her in. She walked to my couch and sat down heavily, staring at her hands. "The house, the business, the properties, it's all gone, or it will be soon." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't even have anywhere to go." I sat down across from her, not sure what to say. "Brittany, I'm sorry. Are you? Are you really?" She looked up at me, and I saw a broken person where my confident sister used to be. "Because I wouldn't be sorry if I were you. I was terrible to you." I watched her crumble, this person who'd once seemed so strong, so sure of herself. I never wanted this to happen. I thought taking it all would finally make me worth something. She laughed bitterly. "I thought Dad loved me more. I thought I deserved everything because I was the successful one." "You are successful?" "No, I'm not. I'm a failure. I failed at everything he gave me." The next morning, Brittany was still on my couch, curled up under the spare blanket I'd given her. She looked smaller in sleep, more like the sister I'd grown up with. I'd made coffee and was sitting at my small kitchen table when she woke up. She sat up slowly, looking around my tiny apartment with fresh eyes. "This is nice," she said quietly. "Simple, but nice. It's enough for me." She accepted the coffee I offered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Anna, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Will you help me?" "Not with money. I know you don't have much, but with knowledge, with understanding how to handle all this mess." I studied her face, looking for any sign of the old Brittany, the one who'd dismissed me as background noise. But all I saw was desperation and genuine remorse. "I'm not here to rescue you," I said finally. "I'm here so you don't drown stupidly." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I understand. We'll start with the paperwork. Figure out what's salvageable and what's not. But Brittany, you have to be honest with me about everything." "I will. I promise." For the first time in months, I believed her. 3 months later, I stood in the community center, arranging folding chairs in a circle. It was a small memorial service for Dad, one that focused on the person he'd been, rather than the complications he'd left behind. About 20 people came. Neighbors, old friends, a few of his former employees. Not a big crowd, but the right crowd. People who'd known him as a man, not as an estate to be divided. Brittany sat in the front row, wearing a simple black dress she'd bought at a thrift store. She'd been staying with Aunt Margaret while she figured out her next steps, and the humility was slowly rebuilding her into someone I could recognize. "Dad wasn't perfect," I said during my brief remarks. "He made mistakes, and he left us with a complicated legacy. But he loved us, and I think he did what he thought was best." After the service, people lingered, sharing memories and stories. Mrs. Patterson hugged me tightly. "Your father would be proud of both of you," she whispered. "You've both grown from this." As I cleaned up the empty chairs, Brittany approached me. "Thank you for doing this. You're welcome. And thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." I looked at my sister, this person who'd once seemed so foreign to me. "We're family, Brittany. That has to count for something." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "It does. It really does." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We walked to our cars together, sisters again, finally understanding what things were really worth.